This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. So, Parshas Eikev. So, a few people asked me if I can talk about my trips. So, we'll try to get it in. You know, I know you've been. By the way, where have you guys been? Now I'm looking all over for you. It's good to see you. Good to see everybody back. You know. Okay, so Parshas Eikev. There's a very important pasuk that discusses the man. Now, contrary to popular opinion, a lot of people, they learned in yeshiva that the man was very delicious, the man was very tasty, the man, it was exotic, it tasted like whatever you wanted, it was great. So they made that up. That's not true. The man was terrible. The man was torturous. The man was horrendous. Really? Which medrash says that? Forget about medrash. It's the pasuk in Chumash. The pasuk says, Vaya'ancha, Hashem tortured you, Vayarivecha, and he starved you, Vayachilcha es haman. He fed you the man, Shelo yadata, you didn't know it, V'lo yadan aveisecha, your fathers didn't know it. Laman hoidiachas. You say, what do you mean, what about all the midrashim that the man tasted like whatever you wanted? They're all true. Imagine I told you, eat this battery every day, it could taste like whatever you want. So in about 3 days you'd have to be institutionalized. It doesn't matter what something tastes like. Very little of food is what it tastes like. Most of it is the way it looks, the texture of it, the way it smells. You could have delicious food, but if it looks like a pill, imagine I told you, take this pill every day, and it could taste like whatever you want. Most people would probably not make it past 2 or 3 days. They would go berserk. They would really need to be institutionalized. People rely on many different qualities of food, and that's why the man was torturous and people were starving. But why did the Rebbe Shalom do this to us? Laman hoidiacha, to let you know. Ki lo ya'al alechem levado yichya ha'adam. Man does not live on bread alone. Ki al kol moitza fi Hashem yichya ha'adam. Man lives on everything that emanates from the mouth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, in the past, we've said over many times from the Arizal. How does the Arizal interpret this pasuk? Very important, a very fundamental Arizal. And that is, you have to be fascinating by the fact that a human being has a guf and has an neshama. Now, that you have a physical component, you have a spiritual component. So you eat a hot dog. So the hot dog is a physical item. So it sustains your body. But what sustains your neshama? So you're eating Chinese food. Chinese food is a davar gashmi. So it sustains your guf. But what sustains your neshama? The neshama also has to eat. Everything in this world has to eat. Malachei hasharis, they eat. Man was the food of the Malachei Hasharis. So what sustains a human being? Says Arizal, every physical item in the world has a soul. The table has a spiritual component to it, which is its source of life. Food has a spiritual soul to it. So the reason why the Rebbe Shalom gave you the man, which was a spiritual food, is to teach you a lesson that the body is nourished by the physical component of the food, and the soul is nourished by the spiritual component of the food. Which, by the way, you only access if you eat properly, with a bracha, with the right kavanos, with the right discipline. So when a person eats pi halacha, the physical component of the food sustains the physical body, and the spiritual component of the food sustains the neshama. Okay, that's the way that Arizal interprets this pasuk. The Shlach quotes the Ari, the Chida quotes the Ari. It's a very well-known comment of the Arizal. And today we're going to take it a step further. We're going to explain an added dimension of the proper way to eat. Okay, so the main idea of today's shiur is to enjoy life properly. People who didn't come tonight, they're not going to know how to enjoy life. They're going to be missing half of it. They're going to be doing the physical, but they're not going to have any time. Today's shiur is about enjoying life. That's what we came. It's the middle of the summer.
What do you do with what do you do with those words?
A wafer dipped in honey. That's the basic taste. That's like, the baseline taste. If you don't have any machshava, it tastes like a wafer dipped in honey. But I tell you something. If you ate something that tastes like a wafer dipped in honey for 3 days, I don't want to bump into you. Okay? Every day, a wafer dipped in honey. People, they can't eat 2 meals in a row that are the same. Imagine every meal, a wafer dipped in honey. Right? Imagine if your wife someone gave you the same stuff for 2 nights in a row. Imagine what kind of... Watch out, right? Okay. Now we're going to talk about, there's a pasuk that speaks about the Shivas Haminim. We know that the Shivas Haminim are Eretz, Chita, Usaira. It's a land of wheat, barley, vegefen, grape, useina, fig, verimain, pomegranate, eretz, zeis shemen, a land that produces the oil of an olive, udavash, and the honey of a date. Nothing to do with bees' honey, it's the honey of a date. Dvash in the Torah refers to the honey of a date. Why does the pasuk say the word eretz 2 times, right? Eretz chitu sa'ira, eretz zeis shemen udavash. So, probably most are familiar with the halachic reason. And that is, if you have 2 fruits, you have an apple and a pomegranate, what do you make the bracha on? The pomegranate, you make it on the Shivas Haminim. Well, what if you have a grape and a pomegranate? So you make the bracha on the grape. Why? Because the grape is earlier in the pasuk. Whatever is earlier in the pasuk takes precedence. However, it says the word eretz twice. So if you have a choice, I have a pomegranate and I have a date. Yeah? So I can make ha'etz on a pomegranate, I can make ha'etz on a date. So the pomegranate is the 3rd one after the first eretz. The date is the 2nd one after the 2nd eretz, right? So you make the bracha on the date and not on the pomegranate. That's why Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, Leil Rosh Hashanah, you know the famous song, dip the apple in the honey, make a bracha loud and clear. It's mamish, it's wrong lahalacha. You don't make a bracha on the apple. You make the bracha on the pomegranate because you make a bracha on the Shivas Haminim, right? They taught you in kindergarten, so the same teacher taught you how good the mun was. Go back to that teacher and tell her, why did you tell me to make the bracha on the apple? Both things that you taught me, so far you're 0 for 2, okay? But you should not make the bracha on the apple, you make the bracha on the... Fine, this is old news, right? We know this already. But the reason why the Torah says eretz twice is it's all dependent on how close it is to either eretz.
So why not just put zay, shem, and dvash before remind and use eretz?
Mean just say eretz once and then make the right order? Okay, that's why we're going to come to another pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara in 3 places in Shas, and the first time is brachos nam aleph, the 2nd time is erevin daf daled am aleph, and the 3rd time is sukkah hey amid beis. I put sukkah here because we're learning sukkah, right? Sunday when we're learning sukkah, we learned this Gemara. The Gemara, a fascinating Gemara. The Gemara says all Shivas Haminim are to teach you halachos of shiurim. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, shiurin dairaisaninu. The shiurin are biblical. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, eretz chita usa'ira v'gefen uta'evna v'rimain eretz shemen udvash. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chanin, Kol HaPasuk Hazeh L'Shiurin Emar. This whole pasuk was taught to teach you shiurin. So let me explain. Chita. What's the shiur of chita? So once upon a time there was something called saras and abayis. You know, nowadays people they call in mold specialists. They think it's mold. It could be, you never know. Back in the day, you could have saras. You wake up in the morning and you see behind your Mona Lisa, there's like this little white spot. You ask your kids, you spilled white out on the... No. Oh man, yesterday Shabbos, I remember I came home and I was talking about Yankel. Is this tzaras? So you bring it to the Kohen, and the Kohen says, I'm afraid to say you have tzaras in your house, we got to lock it up, so we might have to knock it down. Construction. Imagine somebody, he just built a mega $1 million house, He spent 10 years, he moved it to his in-laws for 10 years, And he finally has a big house, and his friends say, why are you back with your in-laws? Whatever, I need to build another house, He spoke Lashon Hara, he ruined his whole house. But be it as it may. So what's halach if you walk into a house that has tzaras in it? The person is tamei. What about a person's begadim? So it depends. If you're carrying the begadim or you're transporting the begadim are a separate entity and the begadim are tamei. However, if you're wearing the begadim are only tamei if you spend a certain amount of time in the house. How much time in the house? Enough of time to eat half a loaf of bread. What kind of bread? Chitim, but not sa'irim. Chitim, it takes longer to eat a half a loaf of chitim than half a loaf of sa'irim. So the reason why the Torah says chitin is to teach you a halacha that what? That when you go into a house that has saras in it, in order for your clothing to become tamei, you need to spend the amount of time in the house that it takes to eat a half a loaf of wheat bread. That's what I learned from chitim. Sa'irim, what do I learn from barley? That if I have a bone of a mess, it only contracts tumah. It only gives off tumah if it's the size of a barley corn. That's why it says sa'ira. Gefen. Why does it say gefen? To teach me the following halacha. we know that a Nazir is not allowed to eat grapes. How much grapes is a Nazir not allowed to eat? The amount of grapes to displace a revius of a certain liquid. What liquid? Wine, but not water. You see, to displace a revius of water, it requires less grapes than to displace a revius of wine. What does that mean? Because you see, wine is very thick. The viscosity of it is very what? Dense. It's dense. So therefore, to put a certain amount of, to displace water, you could displace more water with the same amount of grapes than you could displace wine. Wine, it's going to form, what's the word? A meniscus over the cup, right? So if you have the amount, so the halacha is, how much grapes is a Nazir now to eat? The amount of grapes to displace not a revius of water, but rather a revius of yayin. That's what I learned from Geffen. What do I learn from Te'ina? The halacha is you're not to carry on Shabbos, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, or 4 Amos in Rosh Hashanah. How much is one chayiv for carrying in Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos? A groigeres, a fig, right? So that's the shiur of Yitzia on Shabbos. What about Rimayin? So Rimayin is like this. Kalim are Makabel Tumah, yeah? Kalim are Makabel Tumah. What if the kli breaks, so it's not Makabel Tumah anymore? But what does that mean, breaks? So if I have a bowl, and there's a hole in it, so the Gemara says, Balabatim are cheap. And if there's a hole in their bowl, so they'll say, so I won't store liquid in it, I'll store nuts in it. Well, what if the hole is the size of a nut? So then they'll store a peach in it. And what if it's bigger than a peach? They'll store a rimayin in it. But as soon as it has a hole the size of a rimayin, then the kli is completely useless, and then it's no longer makabel tumah. That's why the Torah says rimayin. And what about a date? What are you going to do with a date? So it's interesting. Olive. This is very important. It says eretz zeis shemen, and now we're going to learn why it had to say a second eretz. It's in a land. Eretz Yisrael is a land that all the shiurim are kezayis. Eretz zayis. It's a land that all the shiurim are kezayis. The isra achilas chelav, the isra achilas dam, the isra achilas chometz. It's all kezayis. And what about the isra of eating on Yom Kippurim? There the Torah doesn't say don't eat. If the Torah would say don't eat, then you wouldn't be able to eat a kezayis. The Torah says torture yourself. So we have a tradition that it's not considered torturing oneself unless you refrain from eating a date's worth, kekoiseves hagasa. So it comes out, the 7 species of which Eretz Yisrael is praised, the reason why it picks these 7 species is to teach 7 shiurim. Wheat is the amount of time you need to spend in a house in order to get tumas saras habayis. Sa'irim is the amount of tumas mace for a bone. Geffen is the amount to displace how many grapes a nazir is now to eat. Te'ena is for Isra Haitzah. Rimayin is to be mavatel kli from being makabel tumah. Zayis is the shiur achila. And Devash is the shiur achila on Yom Kippur. Comes the Heilige Shlach HaKadosh. And the Shlach HaKadosh says something absolutely incredible. So let me just tell you, the Shla was born in the year 1560, and he lived till 1630. So he lived 70 years. It's interesting, there's a Kabbalistic tradition that the Shlach HaKadosh had the neshama of Rus. Be it as it may, his father was the Rebbe of Ram, the Talmud of the Ramah, who wrote the Emek Bracha, who wrote Yesh Neichlem. The Shla was a Rav in Prague, together with the Kli Yakar. I was just at the Kli Yakar's kever. So you say, was I just at the Shla's kever? No, because the Shla left Prague. The Shla, after the Kli Yakar passed away, the Shla was the Rav in Prague, and he always had a great desire to move to Eretz Yisrael. And in the year 1620, he really considered moving seriously when his wife passed away. A year later, he decided he's going. He's not going to tell anyone. He's not going to tell his family. He's not going to tell his children. 1621, he left Prague. He went to Eretz Yisrael. Now, he, in order to sort of compensate and give his kids a certain nechama, he wrote an ethical will, which is 5 volumes, which is called the Shnei Luchos Habris. The Shlach HaKadosh is the ethical will of the Shla. And interesting, so the Shla is coming to Eretz Yisrael. He goes through Germany, he goes through Italy, he goes through Syria. He's coming to Tzfas. He's offered chief rabbi of Tzfas. He rejects the job. He's only going to go to Yerushalayim. Parshas Vayetze. The Shla HaKadosh 1625 comes through the gates of Yerushalayim, Parshas Vayetze. And what does it say in Parshas Vayetze? Ein zeh kiyem beis Elokim v'zeh Shar HaShamayim. The famous Siddur HaShla is called Shar HaShamayim. Why? Because he enters the gates of Yerushalayim, Parshas Vayetze. Now, why did the Shla write a sefer on the Siddur? Very interesting reason. The Shla said, I'm writing a sefer. Why would somebody write a sefer? If somebody writes a sefer for self-aggrandizement, Chassam Sofer writes that you're not allowed to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh. What's the heter to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh? Eis lasos l'Hashem hefiru Torasecha. It's a time to act for God. You have to break the Torah. I have to tell you a funny story about that in a minute. Says Chassam Sofer, but if you're writing down the Torah Sheba'al Peh to promote yourself and not to spread Torah, then you're back to the Isser that you're not allowed to write down the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Taka says Chassam Sofer, you write a sefer Shaloi L'Shem Shamayim, you're actually over an Isser D'Oraisa that Dvarim Sheba'al Peh you can't put to writing. That's a frightening admonition of Chassam Sofer. Anyway, says the Shla, if I'm writing a sefer to get circulation, to spread Torah, what sefer in Klal Yisrael has the widest circulation? Siddurim, Even people who don't have Siddurim, they have Siddurim. That's why he wrote it on the Siddur. I'll tell you a funny story. So we were in Vienna. I'll tell you a little bit about the trip. We were in Vienna. We went to the kever of Yosef Engel. So I was talking about Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. That Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote the Torah, even though you're not allowed to write down the Torah, because Eis lasos l'Hashem hefiru Torasecha. So we had a cameraman, a Polish guy, very smart guy. He said he was a Gentile. Turns out his father's mother's mother was Jewish. So that means his father's Jewish, Anyway, then the next day we go to Prague. In Prague, half the kfarim were illegal to go to. So the Polish cameraman said, what are you talking about? He says, according to Rabbi, you should be able to go to the kever. I said, what are you talking about? He said, yesterday, Rabbi, you gave a shiur. Sometimes you need to break the law to uphold the Torah. So he said, even though it's against the law to go to the kever, but according to Rabbi, he says, this is what he's telling me, according to Rabbi, you should be able to go to the kever. So he was mechazik me. We figured out a way to go, Anyway, so comes the Shla. The Shla says, a davar oyoim v'noira, a davar nifla ad moed. Says the Shla, why is it that all the shiurim are learnt out from the psukim? Chita, sa'ira, gefen, te'ena, rimain, zayis, devash. Says the Shla an incredible thing. That we know what sustains a person. The physical food doesn't sustain a person. It's the spiritual nourishment that sustains a person. Therefore, when you eat wheat, it's not just that wheat is written to give you the shiur of how much time you need to spend in a house to contract saras. Every bite of wheat that you eat, you need to think about the shiur of saras. That's why the shiur of saras is given on chita. So that every morsel of chita that you consume, you need to, as you're chewing on it, you need to think, chita, if there was saras on the bayis, the amount of time I would need to spend in the house to contract the tumah would be kedei achilas pras of chita. That's why the shiur is on chita. So while you're eating the food, not only are you physically nourished, you're spiritually nourished. And when you eat barley, what's barley? Cholent. What should you think about when you eat cholent? You should think, if there was a bone of a mess, how much tumah, how much of the bone would I need in order to contract tumah? A kasara, barley. Every bite of barley you take, you need to think of the shiur tumah. And every cup of wine you drink, you need to think how much wine, how much grapes is a nazir now to eat? The amount of grapes to displace, Raviyas of Yayin. And every olive that you eat, you need to think, this is a shiur of achilas dam, this is a shiur of achilas chaylev, this is a shiur of achilas pesach, of chametz. Every fig you eat. Now, by the way, before you eat figs, you're going to want to check them. How do you check them? I don't know. It's very tough. I don't know. They have videos, supposedly, how to check them. Lots of luck. Okay? But if you do eat figs, then every fig you eat, you need to think this is the shiur of Haitzah on Shabbos. And every pomegranate you eat, You need to think if there was a hole in a kli the size of a pomegranate, the kli wouldn't be makabel tumah. And every date that you eat, when you eat dates, by the way, you got to check them also. You need to think this is the Shir Achila on Yom Kippur. So I just want to share with you, I think it comes out of very big chiddush. That means every time you eat bread, what do you need to think about? Tzaras. Interesting. Does anybody remember, what does Rashi say on the pasuk, Lo selech rachel ba'amecha? Don't be a rachel among your people. Rashi teaches from the Targum, Lo seichel kortzen. Don't eat winks. That's how Rashi teaches it. Don't eat, Lo selech, don't consume, kortzen, winks. Right? You know, when you motion to someone with your eye, it's called a wink. Why is rechilos called don't eat winks, says Rashi? If anyone here is a Baal Lashon Hara, anybody here is Baal Lashon Hara? Or any aspiring Baal Lashon Hara over here? If you want to be a real Baal Lashon Hara, just between me and you don't even have to talk. A real Baal Lashon Hara, you could destroy somebody just with a gesture. You know, you give a little motion, right? And you wink at your friend. You could destroy a guy without saying a word. That's a real Baal Lashon Hara knows how to do that. Just, you know, it's just private between me and you. Therefore the Torah says, Lo selech rachel, don't eat winks. Avada, don't speak it. Don't even wink to your friend. People think, you know, they have like, it's not Lashon Hara, but they could say a million words with like the little motion, right? Now why does it say don't eat? Says Rashi, real Bali Lashon Hara, if you want to like get your friend to believe gossip, you serve him food. So you don't have to say a word. You give him good food, you do a few motions, and you destroy the guy. So it comes out an amazing thing. The Iker Lashon Hara is when? Over a meal. Therefore, think about the Chachma of the Torah. Every time you eat bread, what do you need to be thinking about? The Shiur of Tzaras Habayis. Meaning, the Rebbe is saying, watch out! You're about to eat a meal. This is a Eis Rotzain for Lashon Hara. This is a very opportune time for Lashon Hara. So therefore, there's a safeguard ensured, because every morsel of wheat you're consuming, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about the halacha that is connected to it. So I have to tell you, when I heard this shla, this like opened up a whole world to me. Because then it comes out, here I just have a piece of rye bread. And as I'm eating the rye bread, I'm thinking that the shear of becoming tameh through tumas tzaras habayis for begodim is achilas pras. What does that have to do with my rye bread? So the first yesod you see from here is that in America there's a concept. You ever hear people say, well, what are you doing now? I'm vegging. You ever hear that? I'm vegging. What does that mean? I'm just vegging. I just need to veg. No, there's no vegging. You have a mind. Even when you're eating, I'm just chilling. No, what do you mean you're chilling? Vegging means it's self-induced death. Right now, I would like to kill myself for a few moments and make myself less than a behema. Behema doesn't have a brain. I have one, but I want to turn it off. Okay, you know, sometimes a person does need to relax. But in general, you're eating bread, so now it's a good opportunity to chazer over to review a halacha of tumas saras. But then I'm thinking, is this reserved only to eating? Or could we extrapolate and apply this to anything in life? Whatever you see in this world, why don't we connect it to a halacha, to a gemara, to some Torah, that when we see the item, we should think, oh, this item, that reminds me of... Here, I thought of an example. So we're learning... Well, yeah, when tzitzis reminds us of the 613 mitzvahs, but here, this is very specific. Right, but this is very specific. Here, the piece of bread, as you're eating it, you're supposed to think of the shear of Tumas Saras. So, Lamashal. The Gemara in Masechta Tainis has a big machlokes. Remember, on Yud Amud Beis, where does the rain come from? Right, it's machlokes, Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Where does the rain come from? So Rabbi Lezer says, on Tes Amud Beis, the rain comes from the ocean. The ocean is salty, it's sweetened in the clouds. So when you see a cloud, you should think of the Shita Rebbe Lezer, that the water started out in the ocean, and it was sweetened in the cloud. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, the rain comes from the Mayim Elyonim. So here it's rainy day. Great, it's a rainy day. It's a time to review the Machlokes Rebbe Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua. Why not? I mean, why just look at it? If my bread is supposed to remind me of the Shir Tumah of Tzaras, and my olive is supposed to remind me of the Shir Achilas Chelef, so why shouldn't the cloud remind me of Shitas Rebbe Lezer? So I was thinking, do we see such a concept like this in Shas? And I thought of one Gemara, and when I saw the Shla actually quotes us. What are these called? All right, you guys are on the ball tonight. Fingers. Okay, excellent. Okay, why are the fingers shaped differently? Why don't we just have 5 fingers that look exactly the same? No 2 fingers are the same. This is the small finger, right? As you know, I don't have to explain. Every finger has a different direction, size, and function. Why? So the Gemara says a fantastic thing. If you look at number 5, Ksubas Hemabez, Chada, Kal Chada v'Chada l'Milsei. The Amar Zu Zeres, the pinky is called the Zeres. The next finger is called the Kmitza. The middle finger is the Amma. The next finger is the Etzba. The next finger is the Goydel. Rashi says, you know what the pinky is? The Torah says when you have a Choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, the measurement of the Zeres is, it's Zeres Arkoiv, Zeres Rachbai. So says the Shla, that means when you look at your finger, you're supposed to think of the Choshen. When you look at your pinky, the pinky from here to here is the width and the length of the Choshen. When you look at your pinky, you're supposed to think of the Choshen. And what about this finger? That's the Kmitza. When the Kohen takes a fistful, he takes a fistful with these 3 fingers, and he sort of removes whatever is beneath. So this is for a Kmitza. And the Amma, from the top of the middle finger until the elbow, is an Amma. So when the Torah says the Aron was 1 Amma, 2 Amma is 2.5, the middle finger until the elbow is to measure an Amma. So when you look at your middle finger, you're supposed to think, oh, the menorah is this amount of Amma. The Aron is this amount of Amma. The Shulchan is this amount of Amma. Yeah, the Aron is 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. And the Shulchan is what? 2 by 1 by 1.5. You're supposed to use the finger to help you remember. And what about the Etzba? The Etzba is for the placing of the blood of a Karban Chatas. You ever wonder, what do you do when somebody's bad? Why do you think you use this finger? Because what you're telling him is, watch out. With this finger, we sprinkle the blood of a Karban Chatas. Don't do that. We don't want you to have to bring a Karban Chatas. You didn't know the real reason why we use this finger, right? When you go like this finger is Karban Chatas. When you go like this, you should remember, watch out, don't wear shatnez. I don't want to have to bring Karban Chatas. And this is the Goydel. The Goydel is the matanos on the hands of Aaron and a Mitzayra. When you go like this, when you're about to go like this and rip a guy, you speak Lashon Hara, oh, it's Saras, okay, never mind. So the Shla says, and he's expanding the concept. The concept is that just like each food is supposed to remind you of a different halacha, and as you're eating the food, you're supposed to be thinking about those halachas, the Shla says, that's why you eat with your hands. You ever wonder? It doesn't mean not a fork and knife. Why do we eat with our hands and we don't bend over and just eat? Because since the hands are actually illustrations of halacha, it's in order so that every morsel of food you put into your mouth is supposed to remind yourself that the food is a representation of halacha and Torah, and I'm supposed to be thinking about it as I'm eating. That's what the Shla HaKadosh says. By the way, one of the major essays of the Shla, one of the major subjects in the writing of the Shla, is something called Shar HaOisiyos, the Ois Kuf. Ois Kuf is for Kedushas Achila. One of the main topics in the Kisvei HaShla is the concept of eating b'kedusha, and this is part of it. That every item of food that we have has halachas that are connected to it, and the Shla even says the reason we have 10 fingers and 2 hands based on the Zayar, the 2 hands are the Shnei Luches Habris, and the 10 fingers are the Aseres HaDebros. And as you're picking up the food to eat, you're supposed to be thinking that this is in order to enable me, to remind me to think about halachos as I'm eating. Okay, it's a big madrega, but this is what we're aspiring for. So what we're trying to bring out a concept is that really, aside from the fact that there are many halachos associated with each food, every physical thing in the world has a spiritual component to it and a spiritual source. Okay, and let's explain. There's a famous question on Parshas B'chukoisai. In fact, the Kliyakar asks this question and he gives 10 answers to it. What is maybe the most fundamental concept and basic concept in Judaism? that this world is just a preparation and a hallway for Olam Haba, right? That this world is temporary, that this world is a proizdar, and Olam Haba is the traklin. That, we do mitzvahs, because Rebbe Shalom says if you fulfill the mitzvahs, you can be rewarded. Reward and punishment. Does the Torah speak about Olam Haba? This great principle that the Mesilas Yesharim says, Yesod HaChasidus, V'shoyresh ha'avodah tmima, sheyizbarer v'yisametz etzal ha'adam ma chayvasoi ba'olamai. Right? The Mesilas Yesharim says that a person has to have clear what is my obligation in this world, that this world is a way of achieving Olam Haba. Where in the Torah, how many Parshas in the Torah speak about Olam Haba? We would expect like there should be a whole sefer about Olam Haba. After all, that's what the whole thing's for. 613 mitzvahs to get Olam Haba, right? So there's, Sefer Bereshis, Shemais, and Sefer Olam Haba, right? There's no sefer, there's no Parsha, there's no Perek, there's no Pasuk, there is no mention of Olam Haba, B'chol HaTorah Kula. Haloidah, it's a Pella. The most important concept of the Torah is not in the Torah. There are many answers to this question. The Shlah's answer is, he writes about it in 3 places, in his Toldos Adam in number 8, in Parshas Kedoshim, and in Masechta Psachim. He says in number 10 on the second line, Hikushya B'tos. The whole question is a mistake. The whole question is a mistake. And he explains with the following by answering a different question. The Shlah in number 9 asks, he says, "V'nachkar k'fi miut sechleinu." Let's investigate based on our measly intelligence. B'chakira hakduma, an early investigation. Shalei nizkaru hayeudim haruchanim atar. There are no promises of Olam Haba in the Torah. Another question is, why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh? Why do we call the language the Torah is written in the holy language? So of course the Rambam says, well, because there are no words in Lashon HaKodesh that refer to the reproductive organs. That's the Rambam's Pshat in the Moreh Nevuchim. That's why it's called Lashon HaKodesh. The Ramban is not happy with that Pshat. The Shlosh says a completely different Pshat, why the language of the Torah is written is called Lashon HaKodesh. And with this he answers the $1 million question, why Olam Haba is not mentioned in Torah. You know why it's not mentioned in Torah? Avada, it's mentioned in Torah. It's mentioned in millions or hundreds of places. How's that? Says the Shlah, you have to understand, where's the first time the Torah mentions any reward in the Chumash? It says, Im b'chukoisai telechu, v'nasati gishmechem be'itam. I'll make it rain at the right time. How do we teach geshamim? Rain. Says the Shlah, it's a mistake. That's not what geshem means. Geshem means spiritual influence in the upper worlds. It means Olam Haba. The thing is, we have no idea what that means. Therefore, you see, everything in this world is merely a physical manifestation of the spiritual root. Okay? That means, let's say, if you see Yaakov is fighting with Esav, that's because previously the angel of Esav battled Yaakov Avinu. Once the angel of Esav battled Yaakov Avinu, then later on it's just going to play out in the physical form. Everything in this world has a spiritual root. You know what the spiritual root of rain is? Something called Geshem. Geshem is a spiritual influence and a great benefit and a great bracha of Olam Haba. We have no idea what that is. We can't relate to that. As the spiritual concept comes down to this lowly world, it physicalizes, it crystallizes, it materializes, it puts on a coat, and another coat, and another coat, and another coat, until down here in this world, the real rain, which in Shamayim is Olam Haba, we borrow the term Geshem, and we use that term to refer to the drops of water that fall down onto our fields. But that's not really what Geshama means. Really, Geshama means a spiritual delight of Olam Haba. But we don't know what that means, so we borrow the word Geshem to use it to refer to a physical thing in this world. So the word Geshem for rain is not, rain doesn't really mean, Geshem doesn't really mean rain, it's a borrowed term. The reason why Hebrew is Lashon HaKodesh is because every term that we ascribe to physical items really is a spiritual word that describe spiritual concepts in Shamayim. Let's say a table. Shulchan. You know what shulchan means? That up in Shamayim there is a vessel onto which you could place things to give you enjoyment. But we don't understand what that means. We don't know what Olam Haba is. So down here in this world, we use the word shulchan to describe something that has 4 legs onto which we put our things. But that's not really what shulchan means. All the words that we use for physical things are borrowed from spiritual descriptions of Olam Haba. So in reality, when the Torah says, if you follow the Torah, I'm going to give you rain, that means Olam Haba. That's the Shlah's take on it. The reason I bring this in, I'm trying to bring out a concept. The concept is, every physical phenomenon in this world is rooted in a spiritual phenomenon in upper worlds. So I'll give you an example. I heard this concept many, many years ago. So I was recently in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Johannesburg is the most incredible community in the world. It's Ruba, Deruba, Deruba. The majority of the Yidden there are Balei Tshuva. The vast majority of the Jews there are emes Balei Tshuva. Jews who are thirsting for Torah, love Torah, live Torah, breathe Torah, real Balei Tshuva. And they dedicate time for learning and davening, very Herzige Yidden. Probably the biggest Tshuva movement in the world, maybe in the history of the world, was in South Africa. Without a doubt. The Panovich Rav said, why South Africa? So he said, South African Jews came at the end of the 19th century from Lithuania. They're all Lithuanian Jews. They don't have an ounce of Hasidic blood in them. Panovich Rav said, they came from the heart of the Musar movement, where these were Yidden that had sterling midos, sterling character, and today, the hallmark of their community is their character and the midos. Panovich Rav said, Yidden who have good midos will always come back to the Torah. Because they came from those communities that were connected to the Musar, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that's why they were all became Balei Tshuva. That's what the Panovich Rav said. So I was thinking another interesting idea, and I said it over there, and I think we have a good raya for this. Again, think about the following concept. Everything in the spiritual world is reflected in something physical. The physical world is just a concretization, materialization of the spiritual world. It's interesting. You know what else they found in South Africa in the end of the 19th century? Why did they find there? The biggest gold deposits in the history of the world. That's why they came there. That's why the people came there. You know, the entire Africa, it's a third world country. You know, you go on the plane, they say, by the way, if you came back from Madagascar, watch out, there's plague in Madagascar. Plague is like, the Middle Ages. Every communicable disease, every third world disease is in Africa, right? So Vasapis, the tip of Africa, is like a developed country because they had gold there. And people came there and they developed it, right? So think about it. If there's physical gold in a country, what does that mean? Right? The physical contents of something is sometimes just a manifestation of the spiritual root of the matter. So if there is physical gold laid deep in the deposits of the earth, then there must be spiritual gold in this country. What's the spiritual gold in the country? Thousands and thousands of golden neshamas that came back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is it a coincidence? Nothing in the world is a coincidence. Could we say for sure that in the place where there had the largest gold deposit in the world was the largest Baal Tshuva movement? Nobody can know for sure, but that was a thought I had. Then I said, look, you need a raya to this. You can't start darshaning, world history based on the mineral contents of a certain country. So I said, where in the Torah does it talk about gold? Bereshis, yeah? So, oh wow, you know what the Medrash says on that pasuk? It says, Uzahav ha'aretz hahi toiv. The gold in that land was good. Sham ha'bedoilach. Ve'evan ha'shoyam. So basically it's talking about the gold and jewel deposits of a certain land. Zok the Heilige Medrash. You think the Torah means gold when it talks about gold? That's not what it's referring to. Look at number 11. Asher sham hazav. Elu divrei Torah. this refers to Torah. Uzahav haaretz hahi toiv melamed she'ein Torah k'Torahs Eretz Yisrael. Shama b'doilach mikra, even hashayam mishnah. When the Torah says gold, it means Torah. When the Torah says jewels, it means mikra. When the Torah says even shama, it means Talmud and Tosefta. So I ask you a question. So why didn't the Torah say mikra, mishnah, Talmud? So what, there wasn't gold there? Avada, there was gold there. Ein mikra yotzim midei pshutai. But if there was gold there on the physical level, there must have been gold there on the spiritual level. So if there's gold there on the spiritual, what was the gold on the spiritual level? It was Torah, Mishnah, Mikra, Mishnah. Meaning the physical world is a manifestation of the spiritual world. You know, the reason why the Torah talks about the beauty of the imahis, even though we say Sheker Achein Vehevel HaYofi, but someone on the highest madrega, the physical appearance is a manifestation of the spiritual quality. The problem is we live in a distorted world, so sometimes the representation of the spiritual to the physical is not accurate. But someone like Sarah and Rachel, when the Torah says they were Yefei Torah, Yefei Mara, their physical appearance was an accurate reflection of their spiritual quality. Because the physical is a concretization of the spirit. So maybe that explains the phenomenon in South Africa. Maybe. I'll bring you another ayah to this idea, and we'll end with this. On this pasuk, let's take the shla one more step. By the way, so some people wanted to know, Rabbi, what in the world were you doing the last 2 weeks? We saw you gave a shiur about elephants. I don't know, rabbis give shiur about elephants. The answer is, this is the shla. The shla is saying that whatever you see in life, you need to connect and attach to the halachos relevant to that item. So I don't know if you saw the clip, but so we were zoicha to see an elephant. First of all, if you see an elephant, you make a mashan habriyos. But if you see an elephant, let's say you go to the zoo. Say, I have to take my kids to the zoo. It's a great opportunity to chazer over the sugya Masechta Kedushin, Daf Chaf Hei Amud Beis, that the Gemara has a kasha. We know that in order to be koina anything, ma'is is not koina, money is not koina. That in order to be koina something, you need to bring it into your rishus. So the question is, what if you're in the marketplace? How are you koina an animal in the marketplace? So the Gemara says hagbah. So the Gemara says, how you koina an animal that you can't pick up? So the Gemara says, Masira, you take control of the reins. But says the Gemara, there's a shita of Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon's shita is, you can only be koina an animal b'hagbah. Frak the Gemara, frak Rabbi Yosef, so how are you going to be koina an elephant? Amar Abaye chalipin. Amar Rab Zera, no, you take 4 kalim, you have the elephant put 4 feet on the 4 buckets. Now the elephant did hagbah, so you're kind of the elephant. Inami b'chavilei zmayros. So Rashi says chavilei zmayros means you make steps made out of vine branches. The elephant climbs up. Now the elephant is 3 tfachim off the ground. You did hagbah. Says Tosfos, no. Why would he talk about zmayros? You want to get the elephant off the ground, make steps out of wood or stone. Says Tosfos, you hold up the Zemairos up in the air, the elephant reaches up and jumps up in the air. It's a big kasha because elephants today can't jump. So people are very disturbed by this Gemara. So back then they could jump. I don't know, what do you want from my life? That's what the Gemara says. Some say, no, the Gemara didn't. No, the Gemara knew. You don't know. But you don't know about the elephants in the Gemara. Why say the Gemara didn't know about elephants? Maybe you don't know about the Gemara's elephants. So when you see an elephant, you have to prepare the sugya and kedushin. That's the concept of the shla. That everything in this world is like a trigger. It's supposed to remind you of halachas. You could become a big Talmud Chacham as long as you prepare yourself. What things in the world are supposed to remind you of? Can I give you one more? Don't be upset. I'll give you one more. I don't know if you saw the one. You saw the one about the seals? It's gavaldik. So we went to Cape Town. Yeah, we're going to come to the end. We went to Cape Town, and we took this boat off of Cape Town to an island. It's called Seal Island. There's 64,000 seals on the island. There's not one amma that there are no seals on the island. So I will admit, I didn't know the first thing about the halachas of seals. I didn't know anything about seals. Very good. But one thing that technology allows is you could correct your, There's one Mishnah in Kalim, Parak Yud Zayin, Mishnah Yud Gimel. It says, anything in the Yam, anything that you make Kalim, a kli, out of anything that lives in the sea is tahar. There's only one exception. Kelev Hayam. That's the only thing that lives in the sea. If you make a kli out of it, it's Makabel Tumah. Why? Because it goes to the Yabasha. Ma Kelev Hayam. It's a seal. This is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. So the Bali Musar say like this. The Bali Musar say, the worst thing in this world is to be wishy-washy. Either be a big tzaddik, or be a big Rasha. But don't be a Beinani. Why? So Bali Musar say, if you're a big tzaddik, you're a big tzaddik. And if you're a big Rasha, you could be a big tzaddik. But if you're wishy-washy, then you're not going to be anything. You're just going to do what the other guy tells you to do. So the Bali Musar bring a raya. Rivka's pregnant. She has a kid. She passes by the shul, he wants to go out. She passes by the house of Avodah Zarah, he wants to go out. Rivka's all upset. She goes to Shem. Shem says, don't worry. One's going to be a tzaddik, the other one's going to be Hitler. Oh, Baruch Hashem, Yiddish Nachas. What calmed Rivka down? Says the Bali Musar, in the Vardik they say this. That Yaakov's a big tzaddik, and Esav's a big Rasha, and if he put his heart to it, he could also be a big tzaddik. But what Rivka thought is, what was she having? A wishy-washy kid. Oh, learning a geshmak. Oh, Averis geshmak. That's the worst. Have a backbone. Stand for something. Better to stand for something bad than to stand for nothing. That's what they say in the Vardik. Don't try that at home, okay? I'm just telling you what it's a principle, okay? Don't do it. It's an idea. Not every, you have to know. Fine. So anyway, that's the pshat, the Bali Musar say in the seal. Either be a land animal, or be an aquatic animal. But what are you, seal? You're water and the land? Tameh. Tameh. The Shita Rabbi Akiva is if you make kalim out of seals, it's tameh. So when you see a seal, don't sit there and veg. Chazer over in the Mishnah and Kalim, Yud Zayin Yud Gimel, that it's tameh because it goes to the Yabasha. Okay, let's end off with the following. So, Rav Simcha Wasserman, Zechatzak Levracha, I had a Rebbe, Rav Simcha, Rabbi Chanan's son, was one of the founders, one of the fathers of Kiruv, of the concept of Kiruv. He had a yeshiva in Los Angeles. One of my Rabbeim, Rav Binyamin Luban, said over that he once went to visit Rav Simcha Wasserman, and he was learning with beginners. Okay, here's a Goy Noilam, Rabbi Chanan's son. He was sitting there was a beginner opposite, he was teaching Gemara. He said, Ta, come, and the guy opposite him said, Ta, come, Shema, here, Shema, here. Here's somebody, he could be giving a pilpush, and he's teaching somebody else, like the Aleph Beis of Gemara. Anyway, Rav Simcha Wasserman once said, Pshat, in this inyan, that the Shivas Haminim correspond to the 7 halachos, and really this will tie together everything we mentioned tonight. What's the concept that these Shivas Haminim correspond to 7 different halachos? Like, what's the deeper meaning behind this? And he said he spoke this out with the Panovich Rav Kahaneman, and he suggested the following, and Rav Kahaneman agreed. And that is, it's not arbitrary. It's not by accident. Oh, chita! There is a halacha that if you want to be Makabel Tumah from Tzaras Batim, you need to stay in the house long enough to eat a half a loaf. It's not, that's a good way, a mnemonic to remember that halacha. The halacha, that in order to contract Tumah, you need to stay in the house the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf, is the neshama of wheat. Remember we said every physical thing has a spiritual root? The spiritual root of wheat is that particular halacha. That's the neshama of it. And when you eat, the physical wheat nourishes your physical body, and the spiritual halacha connected to it, which is the soul of that item, that sustains your neshama. It's not just like, this is a good mnemonic, I'm going to have a test in a week. A good way to remember this halacha is to connect it to it. No, it's more than that. That halacha is the source of it, is the root of it. It's not that connected to a grape there happens to be halacha. The amount of grapes that displace or a vis of wine is what a nazir is now to consume. That's the neshama of a grape. it would come out if you want to know what gives life to a pinky. What's the neshama of a pinky? The measurement of the choshen. What gives neshama to, could be if somebody injures a finger. Something about the halacha that corresponds to the finger somehow is not being observed, learned, connected to. So what does it mean that these are the 7 species with which Eretz Yisrael is praised? When we say that the soul of the fruit is that halacha that connects with it, in Eretz Yisrael, which is the source of the whole world, which is Tabor Haaretz, the navel of the world, that is where the halacha and the fruit connect. In Eretz Yisrael, when you eat the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, you're literally consuming those halachas. Elsewhere in the world, it's a more distant connection. The halacha is, on a more remote level, the source of that fruit. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's the halacha itself that is growing and sprouting through the fruit. There's an interesting thing. We'll end with this. The Torah writes, when you make ala mechia, you shouldn't say v'haleinu l'soicha v'samchin v'yana v'noichal miperia. The Torah says, don't say we want to go to Eretz Yisrael to eat the fruits, like the Gemara says Moshe wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael to eat the fruits. Don't say that in ala mechia, that Hashem should bring us to Eretz Yisrael to eat the fruits. The Bach, we just had the cover of the Bach. The Bach says, no, you should say that you want to go to Eretz Yisrael to eat the fruits. The Ribbono Shel Olam's Shechina is in Eretz Yisrael. The land contains the Shechina. The fruits then are somehow the embodiment of the Shechina. When you consume the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, you're literally consuming Kedusha. We do want to go into Eretz Yisrael to eat the fruits. But now what we're saying are, not only is the fruit somehow the embodiment of Shechina, but the halacha is connected to the Shivas Haminim more than anywhere in the else. Those halachas are literally sprouting in Eretz Yisrael, and by consuming them, you're consuming Dvarim Kedoshim. So, Rabbi, I think based on what we're learning tonight, it's a little bit of a different way to look at the world. Prepare yourself. You're walking down you look at the water, you should think of the power of Hashem, like David HaMelech says, Mikoilos Mayim Rabim, from the sound of the great waters. What? What went off? The camera went off. Mikoilos Mayim Rabim, from the sound of the great waters. Adirim Mishpreyam, the mighty waters of the sea. Adir B'Amarim Hashem, we see how great Hashem is on high. Meaning the water is supposed to remind us of the power of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And a person looks at the world in this way, so the whole world is an illustration and a concretization of the Yisodos HaTorah. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great night.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.